Hey, this is Fantasy Simmer here. We're here to give you a tutorial on how to use our Draft Optimizer software. This is a high-powered computer simulation for fantasy football snake drafts. It's designed to optimize who the best players are for you to draft in each of your picks. It takes out the guesswork and it factors in real data such as player projections, injury rates, buys, suspensions, who you've already picked, the optimal rounds for future picks, and it determines the top options available at each of your picks, simulates thousands of seasons, and it maximizes the lineup's projected points in each week of each season. It outputs a ranked list of the optimal selections in a matter of seconds, and it provides personalized recommendations based off of what's actually likely to happen throughout your entire draft, not just some ranked list of guesses by experts. So first you need to go to our website to download this, either through our trusted partner FastSpring, which allows for a Norton secured install. Otherwise, there's a direct download link. It's the exact same file. You then run the installer. You may get a message about Windows protecting your PC. You need to click more info and then run anyways. You'll also get a message about having an app from an unknown publisher making changes. You need to accept that every time you run the draft. These are admittedly things that we hope to fix, but we didn't quite get done in time for the season. Then you just follow the instructions on the installer, and it's pretty straightforward, typical Windows installer. So when you first open your Draft Optimizer program, it'll come to the Settings tab. It's critical to set these up before your draft, otherwise the results won't be correct. Most of this is fairly straightforward. Number of teams, 8, 10, or 12. My draft position, this is where you're going to be selecting in the first round of the draft. Scoring type, PPR standard, half PPR, number of rounds. Simulated seasons is the one thing that is a little tricky. You can choose between 1,000 and 10,000 seasons for the simulator to run. The more seasons, the more accurate and more consistent your results are. But this obviously takes more time, giving you less time to analyze your pick. Obviously, this is computer dependent, so a high-powered computer you might be able to get away with faster. But for mock drafts like this one, we want to stick with lower simulated seasons, so we'll go with 1,000 right here. Lineup composition then is the next thing. This is also fairly straightforward. This is just the number of positions in your weekly starting lineup. So this is kind of your typical weekly starting lineup here for lots of your drafts, but customize it for whatever you guys have. Finally, don't forget to click this Update Settings button. It'll turn red when you make any changes. Make sure you click that. Otherwise, none of your changes that you just made will be recorded. So then we move on to the Selected Players tab. This allows you to keep track of your players. You need to know who's already selected so that you're not analyzing those players, and you also need to know what your roster is already comprised of, because that will change how the simulator outputs the results. For an easy example, if all your starting running backs slots and your flex slot is full, wide receiver will be heavily favored as they'll be filling a starting slot compared to the running back filling a bench slot. That's obviously going to be affecting your weekly lineup points as the starter is going to be actually contributing to that. So this does admittedly take a little bit of work to do, but you do get the hang of it fairly quickly. You might need to run a mock draft or two before you really feel comfortable. In mock drafts with only 30 seconds, this can be a bit of a chore, but it gets much easier when you're in a real draft with more time. If you get the hang of this in mock drafts, it's going to be a breeze in real drafts. So as players are selected by opponents, go through the available players in their respective lists and click on the player that was just selected by your opponent, and then click Select under Other Selected Players to move that player into the Other Selected Players list. Keep doing that as your opponents select their players, and for your own players, do the exact same thing, but then go up to the My Players tab and click that Select button. Now, if you make a mistake in either of these lists, it's fairly simple. Just click on the player that you accidentally selected and click the Remove button, and they're removed from the respective list, and they're put at the top of their available players list, ready to be selected again. So After you've kept track of your players, you go to the simulator tab. And when you come here, the only thing that's going to be there the first time is this run simulator button. So we run that, and there's going to be a terminal that pops up in another window that we don't see, and it's just outputting what's going on in the draft at the time. But then these results are outputted, and these are the top available players for you to draft, as well as the best option. How many seasons was this player the best option? So in this simulation, Christian McCaffrey was the best player to take in 25% of the drafts, Ezekiel Elliott in 20%. Also then on the selected player, you can see their stats, average, floor, ceiling, as well as how many games they're available in the season, and that's based off their injury projections, and also potentially how they're injured in the beginning of the season, as well as it shows how many weeks they're going to be suspended or injured to start the season. Then at the bottom, you do see the best lineup with the selected player, and this is going to include future picks that you're going to take with this player. Now, don't feel compelled to take the best player every time. Now, with this output, I would probably only take Christian McCaffrey or Ezekiel Elliott, as they're pretty clear cut the top players, and you get a significant drop off after that. But as the draft progresses, this is going to even out quite a bit. You'll see the top player being maybe 7%, and the bottom player maybe 5%. And at that point, it really doesn't make a tremendous amount of difference. So go through, maybe try to get risky if you see the top guy has an ADP of a few rounds later. Maybe stash him, even though he's worth the projections. He's still projected to be the best player there, but you can still get a pretty good player at a later pick, and then wait to take that guy in a later round. So after you decide who you're going to pick, make sure it's critical you go to your real draft and you make that selection in the real draft. There's no connection between this optimizing software and your real draft, so you got to make sure that you don't forget to do that. But after you do that, then go back to your selected players tab, take the player that you selected, put them in your list, and then continue on with all the other players that are being selected. And then as it approaches your turn again, go to the simulator, run it again. Again, that terminal is going to pop up. And now you can see what I was talking about, where this starts to even out a little bit. And maybe you've got a few different options here. And as it gets into the later rounds, you're going to have several options to go off of. So you just then you make your selection again, and you keep going back and forth between these two tabs. Just some general tips. We definitely like to say run this in a few mock drafts before your actual draft. The software does take a little bit of time to get used to. Much better to make a mistake in a mock draft than an actual draft. In mock drafts, definitely try to avoid the first or last picks, as the turnaround gets really quick, having to do this twice right in a row. The middle picks are the best in mock drafts. This, as we said, it becomes much less of a concern in real drafts, as you do have much more time to make your selections and analyze. We like to recommend to turn on the sound in your mock draft. Sometimes doing two things at once, you can get distracted, especially if some people start talking some smack over the draft software. Those audible warnings really help to make sure you don't miss a pick. If you're running behind and you haven't picked all of the opponent selected players, just go and make that run the simulator again, and you might have some players that were already selected in your top list, but it'll still be there for you to analyze several players. Make sure, I like to personally run this simulator 1 or even 2 picks early. Worst case scenario, your top player gets nabbed 1 pick before you, and then you only have 9 or 8 players to compare. But the extra time that you get to analyze outweighs that, especially in mock drafts where it's a fairly quick turnaround. Just remember when you go back to your selected players tab to not only add the player that you just took, but the player that was took before you. Uh, this also takes us to a point. Make sure you keep track of these selected numbers. Make sure that this total player selected is reflected as the number of players that have been picked in the real draft, and then my selections, make sure that reflects what round you just made your last selection in. And then when time is running out, either here in the optimizer, you can do a search function to find your guy if you can't find them, and as time is running out in the real draft, make sure you pick one guy from your simulator and then you search for him and then just take him. Otherwise, you're going to be picking some guy that's just the top of their ADP list at that current pick, and it's not necessarily going to be an optimal pick for you. Then finally, our last recommendation is in the last few rounds of the draft, feel free to deviate and find yourself a sleeper. If you think you got some inside intel on a player, go for it in the 13th round, 14th round. It's just probably not wise to do that earlier on. In the early rounds of the draft, it's all about playing it safe. In the later rounds, it's where you can get risky. So hope that helps everyone figure out how to run our software. Like we said, run it a few times before your actual draft. But we hope that this helps you guys out, and we hope it helps you win your leagues.